We're continuing to explore the way how the world works through the consumer. We're going to look at the Faustian pact and the way how that we can connect it to existential arbitrage, and so further explore themes around our way of life, but in reference to well-known stories to give context to what we explore. And so in that way, hopefully it aids the understanding that's kind of a prerequisite for any, say, any way that we would sever this bond or this pact that we make with the devil, as it were. The story goes that a brilliant scholar was dissatisfied with his level of knowledge and so made a deal with the devil, or I think it was a devil's intermediary, to secure knowledge and wisdom and maybe a worldly success. We're familiar with other stories around, people making deals with the devil for worldly success. And so there's an intention on the part of this scholar or any, say, person. So if you are wanting to achieve the heights of whatever it is you do, and you have that's your intention, and then you have the middleman that come to negotiate ultimately your success, then the intention, the choice that you make, you obviously are conscious of your choice, you're conscious of the pact that you enter into, that you're selling yourself down the river, or your soul, as it were. And so therefore that intentionality is critical when you're looking at the difference between the well-known story, or what we hear when you hear of people making deals with the devil, as it were, compared to existential arbitrage. And as a result of that, the pact that we make, the Faustian bargain that we're engaged with, is totalizing to a degree that people can't recognize the nature of the trade that they ultimately make against ourselves. And so this is the nuance of difference that we need to explore to understand our existential status. I'll just give a brief overview of existential arbitrage, because it is a concept that's not that I've developed in reference to the production process of the consumer. So existential arbitrage is when you have an absence within the self, and yet this absence predicates value that's marginally given because it's in reference to work-life balance. So if the absence is a creativity that you're not credited when you're given as a demand center, then ultimately that legitimizes the way that you're orientated towards life through a work-life balance when the only thing that you can do is demand. And so when you so in that way, if life's given as a totalizing bias journey, you externalize risk, because what's set out is that totalizing claim. And because risk is inextricably connected to creativity, your creativity is in reference to the value. And so what underwrites obviously value is the absence of creativity, because you're a demand center. And so what happens is that people invest themselves in a role, so in the marginality of their time, because when you're looking at the totalizing claim that's made on time. And so what happens is that the risk reward, or what is considered to be a risk-free trade, which is what financial arbitrage is. Financial arbitrage is when you've got two different assets in one market and another one, and you can buy in one market and sell in the other, and you obviously profit from the difference in the values. Here, it's not existential arbitrage is completely different, because there is a risk, but we externalize the risk through the way how that we're orientated towards our time as marginal or as a value. And so we can't see that the nature of the bonded servitude or the pact that we make with ourselves is predicated upon externalizing a totalizing risk. And in that way, the bond that we make, and it's a bond that we make with ourselves because we're orientated towards the future self, but ultimately it's a bond that we make with each other because we're all given in the same way. And as we all practice the same trade, the same bargain is given for everybody. And so that Faustian pact binds us together, right? Because there's only one production process of the consumer. We all practice the same trade. It's existential arbitrage. So if you externalize the risk because you're not credited creativity, then you're orientated towards life as an economic agent. And in that turn, the Faustian pact is considerably more intractable because we have no awareness of the nature of the trade we make against the self, because the self is a marginal self, and so any trade that you make, you're investing in the self. And so obviously that means to say that you're orientated towards what would define the self in reference to social proof of mobility or of the trade. Okay, so I always talk about this, is that is literally just social mobility, or what is held out for you as your transcendence. But transcendence is marginally given because what underwrites it is the absence of creativity when you're given as a demand center. And so when you're looking at the story of Faust, all the protagonists in the story have an intention in reference to what they're giving up and what they're attaining. We, on the other hand, are completely oblivious and so are not aware of that. So what we do when you externalize, and this relates to the way how we use money as a tool for thinking, is that we externalize that risk, we externalize our ability to be aware, all right, so we're oblivious. And so as a result of that, the nature of the bond that we make with ourselves, we don't understand the way how that we are the architect of our own bonded servitude. All right, that we do it, literally, we do it to ourselves. There's no mediating force in this. There's no mediator that comes along to solicit, say, to engender, to create the circumstance that therefore would then define the way how that we would approach it through the intentionality or show agency on the part. Because all the protagonists do show agency, but we, through being oblivious, are not. So we are sleepwalking through life because life is given as a formula, and so therefore through being economic agents, we externalize our ability to think holistically, to think life holistically, and as a result of that blinds us to what is basically staring us in the face. And so that Faustian pact is considerably more virulent as far as an intractable bond that places it upon people, because if people are simply not aware, then and the way how life reinforces, because it's not done through any Machiavellian, say, plot. It's done as people. We have a socially sanctioned kind of bubble that we work within, and you don't question, obviously, the nature of it, because I talked about if you go from a wage slave to an entrepreneur produces themselves as a consumer, so they're still given as a credit instrument in that way. And so we could say that the Faustian pact is the way that we become instrumentalized, so become a credit instrument or a demand center, but then we don't understand that if through orientating or making this pact, this existential arbitrage, we are continually outsourcing creativity, then the nature of the pact, our worldly success, and it doesn't have to be put in the terms of the Faustian bargain when you're looking at a person that attains some worldly success. It's literally just the way how the world works. So if the way how the world works is in reference to you producing yourself as a consumer, you have to understand the mechanism of that production. And if you don't look at it from that aspect, then how are you going to get a view to a way of life, and do justice ultimately to your birth? Because if you don't recognise that the economy produces one product, which is you're a demand centre. If you don't understand that it's driven by one trade, which is existential arbitrage, so a trade that you make against the self, all right, that you don't know, you short the self, okay? You short the self to go long the consumer or the asset that you produce to place the marginal self in, and yet you'll sell yourself otherwise. You'll sell yourself not to see that, because any person that's orientated towards a Faustian bargain that we've set up invests in their life marginally because it's through a value, and the value is predicated upon the absence of creativity, because ultimately they produce the consumer and they invest in the asset while simultaneously discounting that. And so absolve themselves of responsibility, and then what will happen, you'll get narratives that will be fed to you to say, oh, they're the people, that's them, they're the evil people. The Faust, the bargain, this world is being created by these evil kind of group, and yet then you're powerless. You don't realize that you animate your actions. And the sooner that people recognize the nature of what you're dealing with, then you'll understand the significance of your actions, the opportunity cost of your actions. So if you're familiar with Faust or the Faustian bargain, the Devil's Pact, the way how it's been popularized or in culture, this is ultimately it. And so in that way, it's actually not disempowering, it's actually empowering, because the sooner that you realize that you do it to yourself, that you stand accused and you're the one that's accusing yourself, that you're not good enough because you've been sold, you sell yourself, right? The only reason why you buy is because you've been sold prior. And so what's the requirement to see this? Is becoming aware. The sooner that you become aware, the sooner you realize the way how it works, then there's potentially an out for it. But the nature of it is in reference to the obliviousness that is civilizational in scope. So that's why it makes it so difficult, because you're literally enveloped around it. Every single person that you meet, even the people that like to think that they're aware, if they've never asked the question of how they produce themselves as a consumer or what's the mechanism involved for that, they're not aware. And it doesn't matter who they are. If they've never asked that question and drill it down into your existential status as a demand center or the way that you're orientated towards life, then they're not aware. And this is what we're exploring. We're trying to make people aware.